Herzlich willkommen zu der 4. Ausgabe Grundeinkommen, was geht vom Verein Dein Grundeinkommen. Ja, es freut mich sehr, einen weiteren Gast anzukündigen, und zwar der Scott Santens aus den USA. Vor 2 Tagen haben wir ja ein Gespräch mit dem Daniel Häni und haben in unseren eigenen 4 Wänden umgekocht und diskutiert. Und es freut mich sehr, Übersee zu gehen, auf Amerika, ein grosses Land, eine grosse Bevölkerung, die sich für Grundeinkommen interessiert. Unterschiedlich zum Teil, aber es ist viel gegangen in der Vergangenheit und ich freue mich sehr, meinen nächsten Gast zu begrüßen. Und zwar haben wir gesagt, wir reden immer auf Muttersprache, wenn möglich, und der Scott redet Englisch und darum wechsle ich jetzt auf Englisch und wünsche euch viel Spaß. Hello, Scott, and welcome to the live stream.
Hi there, thank you for having me.
Cool. I'm a bit nervous, to be honest, because just a few minutes before we started, I wasn't sure if this all happened, but as much as I know you, I knew it's going to happen, and I'm more than thankful that we can talk about universal basic income and the US specifically. We hear things in press and through Twitter and so, but I know I can get more out of it from a personal and from you, because I know you're in this topic since quite a while. You write yourself, you say you're an UBI advocate and writer. Please let us know, what is a UBI advocate?
Yeah, I guess that's a position that I created myself. And, it's interesting, I would consider it to be an unpaid position, and I'm enabled to do it by actually having a basic income that I have crowdfunded. So I have a monthly crowdfunded basic income, and that enables me to pursue the work that I feel is most important. And that work to me is to make sure that I help the world better understand what basic income is. I feel like I kind of act as like a translator for the academics, because when I got into this back in 2013, there was loads of academic papers and things that no one would ever read, and articles being written that just didn't even mention basic income. So I felt that there needed to be some kind of popularizer of basic income information, and so I decided to do that myself.
Wow, wicked. So you're the kind of guy who breaks it down on 140 characters.
Yeah, I try.
Great. Thanks for that. You, as I said, you've been on this for quite a while, and has like the situation changed this year, 2020? It started with COVID. It got crazy. We had several new situations, personally, at home, families, economically, job-wise. The world turned upside down nearly overnight. And we noticed here, but I know also in the USA, a shift of understanding of universal basic income, or not say a shift, a popularity. How was this in the US, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I would say that this is a long-term growth thing, and perhaps even kind of exponential in its growth, where this has been growing as a discussion worldwide for years. And because I was a part of it and really looking at this even back when Switzerland did its signature initiative and referendum to vote on it, that in itself caused a lot of new interest around the world. Lots of articles are written about basic income for the first time because of that. And it seems like it's continued to grow. And so here in the US, Andrew Yang just ran for president here, and he started running like in, back in 2017. But so he had like all of 2018 to help push this idea, and 2019. And so it's just interesting that here we are, where because of the presidential election, a lot of people started to understand and hear about basic income for the first time through Andrew Yang's candidacy. And then right after that ended, then the pandemic hit, and suddenly it was just, the need for it was very much in your face, where what are we going to do? And it was interesting how here in the US, there was an immediate push toward discussing immediate cash transfers as basic income. So it's not that we've never done like stimulus checks before. We did that during like our previous crisis as well. But it was very immediate to start talking about let's get cash to people. And both sides here in the US agreed to that, as in, yes, let's get cash to people. And then the argument was how to best go about that. So here in the US, we did one round of stimulus checks that went to about 200 million Americans. And also there was the unemployment insurance boost, which was $600 a week flat rate to everyone who was unemployed. And besides just covering normal unemployment, then they also said, oh, wait, we're not covering, these people who are freelancers, gig workers, these kinds of people who are slipping through the cracks of the existing safety net. So let's make sure and get them $600 a week too. So that, of course, was something I think that was inspired by this talk around basic income, and it did show macroeconomically that, hey, it actually prevented jobs from being lost thanks to people actually getting an income boost. So here in the US, 2/3 of people who were unemployed actually got an income boost compared to what they were getting while they were employed because of that $600 a week flat rate. And that actually stimulated the economy and prevented job loss. So it was interesting to see that also even this unemployment insurance boost that you only got for being unemployed actually still didn't create this, effect of people refusing to go back to work. But people did choose to go back to work when they wanted to, when they had that ability with that job actually calling them back. So it's interesting. So if this evidence from this giant experiment showed that people who are only receiving income because they are employed still become employed, then obviously if you get an income for remaining unemployed or employed, that it's not going to have the effect of this disincentive that people fear either.
Hey, unconditionality suddenly worked. Distribution, direct money to individuals suddenly worked. And then even a proof of that the people can't stay home, being lazy, not doing anything. Like three major points why and what basic income stands for suddenly worked. I mean, are we at the point where we really should leave the discussion and start talking about how we can work with that and how we just start doing it because we already have a proof of concept brought up by a crisis, but what more do we need?
Yeah. No, I actually have felt that way for years even anyways, where, just experiment after experiment just shows more and more positive data. And although it's interesting to learn that data and learn these new specifics that hadn't been learned before, it just continues to be positive. And I believe that, let's just get this going. And so here we are in this position where, and this is true all over the world, where just people need money, that is an immediate need because of this evaporation of jobs due to the pandemic affecting the economies around the world. And so, of course, here in the US, because of our terrible job at handling the pandemic, we seem to be doing particularly poorly when it comes to the loss of jobs. I know countries all around the world are experiencing this to a degree as well. And we all know that when people are in line for food banks, the problem is not that there's some scarcity of food. Like there's not an issue where there's just not enough food out there. The problem is that people just don't have money. And the reason they don't have money is because we created a system where you needed a job in order to obtain money, or you have to prove yourself to the state as being deserving of either food assistance or money in order to obtain food. And so, of course, if you don't have a job and you fall through the system, then you need something, and the only thing you can get is food bank assistance. And so then there's lines, like giant lines for food banks, and it's just atrocious to see that is this result. Like, I think the giant lines for food banks should be a bright signal that the system itself is not working. Like, it is a failure for there to be giant lines for food banks. We should just make sure people have the money to buy food in stores. And if people are getting evicted from their homes, we should make sure that they have the money to pay rent and, pay their mortgages. And, we're not doing that. But hopefully we can make that argument and continue to say, hey, look, these stimulus checks, they worked. This unemployment assistance worked. Let's just make sure that everyone gets this income every month so that they can pay for food, that they can pay for housing, that they can even be boosted above their incomes if they're working, so that they can actually stimulate the economy and prevent further job loss through their spending. Let's show people that this is what we need. And then once people get used to that and actually experience it for themselves, both the boost through the income without conditions, and also those experiencing the lack of that, this experiencing how the safety net works for the first time in their lives, that in itself is pushing towards this, let's actually drop the strings and let's just make sure people have this unconditional floor that nobody can fall through.
Yeah, great. You're saying, or we see this too, we are already having a detachment, a sort of detachment that happened through, especially through the lockdown, from a job and the income by the job and a need of income. Now, my question is it, do the people need more money? Do we need, because always the topic, money on top or included in taxes or paid by taxes, or just a secure net which you can't fall under, but if you earn, you're fine, and if not, you get this universal basic income. What do you think? Is it do we need the security that we have income at the time when we need it, and with all the positive effects you said of stimulating the market economy and leaving the person with possibility to decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong, and not meaning to stand in this queue or in this queue because there you have a check for. But do the people actually need more money, or just the security of having it at the time?
Yeah, well, I think I think it's both, in that, unconditional basic income is I wouldn't even say it's primarily about the money. Like, the money part is important and it's part of the definition, but the unconditionality of it is what I think the most important part, because that unconditionality means that you have some degree of power, that you have the power to, refuse, insufficient wages, the insufficient conditions. You have the power to refuse abusive relationships that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that power, that lack of power, I think is responsible for a lot of things that therefore introducing that power would solve to a great degree. And it's not only about power, but it's also about security. It's about dignity. It's about trust. It's about time. All of these things flow out of the unconditional aspect of it. And I think that this traditional belief of let's like only help people when they fall into a hole, and so people are like falling into giant holes left and right. And then what we do is, look down into those holes, and then we basically make a judgment call if they deserve to be pulled out of it or not. And then we determine how to pull them out of it. And it just makes more sense to say, let's avoid people falling into these holes. Let's like pave over the holes so that no one ever falls into them. And so it's a societal mind shift to go from I would describe as like a firefighting society to a society that actively tries to prevent any fires from happening. And if we can make that shift and say, look, no one should ever fall into poverty, then an outcome of that too is this removal of this fear that people have of falling into it, this rampant insecurity, this chronic stress. And when you remove that, then of course that solves so many other issues as well, that among people who would actually never have fallen into poverty, but experience the effects of this constant chronic fear of the worst case scenarios that could happen as well.
Great. Progressive, proactive, and liberal.
Yeah.
Exactly why we fight for universal basic income. Scott, please move a little bit to the left or to the right, because it's nice because the sun shines on you a little bit more. Can you, yeah, that's better. And it was a little bit irritating seeing you, but it's nice. We know the sun's shining, so it's morning at your time. Our day is soon over. Let me quickly jump back to the Yang gang. Oh, I loved it. Andrew Yang, I also had a phone call with him once, and I was really raising the finger and said, hey, don't just go for additional money. Universal basic income is not helicopter money to spread to everybody, but yes, the reason or the idea behind is that it is for everybody, and everybody has the right to have it. Andrew said, when I'm president, I will pay out every US citizen every month $1,000. And he never mentioned the security in it, but I do understand, because he was campaign, he was presidential candidate campaign, but still, is the debate in America, hey, we just need to secure the people and this with money, or is it just does it run better to say, hey, we're just paying out 1,000 for everybody?
Well, I think we're learning as we go as far as what is the way of communicating it best to Americans. And I also just think that there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I don't know about, defining what is best, because I think that depends on the person and also the context of the situation. So I would say, as an example, Andrew Yang was running on this, what he called the Freedom Dividend. So he was already accentuating the freedom part of it and accentuating the dividend part of it. Dividend being, capitalistic in nature, that could appeal to Americans and desire for something pro-capitalism, and to avoid like this, that's socialism kind of argument by calling it a dividend. And he was talking about it as, hey, this is a dividend via technology, because we are experiencing already the impacts of technological unemployment, and that Trump is president largely because we automated away so many jobs in these key swing states that led to Trump becoming president. So let's actually fix this technological unemployment problem via this dividend. Let's actually make it so that Amazon, which is paying no taxes right now, actually pays taxes, and that tax it goes to everyone as this dividend, so that people feel that they have earned it and it's not some kind of welfare program. So that was the way Yang was running. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And so then during this pandemic, there was unemployment, mass unemployment, but it wasn't because of technology, although because it was related to a virus, that it makes sense to automate more than what people were already doing. So it's not like technological unemployment left the picture, but it did become an immediate unemployment issue. And I think that changes the way that we talk about basic income a little bit here in the US, because we weren't talking about it as being some kind of means of averting immediate, say, more natural disasters. Like, okay, we need to make sure that people have basic income because, climate change is resulting in wildfires. And what about, say, flooding and hurricanes and all these other disasters that have been happening and continue to happen? Suddenly people look at basic income in this new light and say, oh, well, this is actually really effective for all these disaster scenarios as well that we can't plan for. We know there's going to be disaster of some kind, but we don't know what it's going to be. But we can make sure that people during these disaster times have this floor of unconditional security so that they can get through these disasters and bounce back from them with resilience that they wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that it's just important to speak about basic income in ways that are relevant to the time and also to the audience. So, if you're speaking to a conservative crowd, maybe it doesn't make sense to talk about poverty. Maybe it makes more sense to talk about, basic income as like a tax rebate or a tax credit or something along those lines, and then something, more about freedom and liberty and those aspects of basic income instead of, say, more of a leftist crowd that I think would be more interested in UBI as a reducer of poverty, as a reducer of inequality, and as a way of actually really tackling climate change in a way that we haven't been able to tackle right now, as long as people are only concerned, about coming up with money for the next month instead of thinking about 10 years down the road.
Cool. Shortly stay with Yang. I heard under Joe Biden, he will have a mandate in the politics. Is that true? And what will his mandate be?
Yeah, so he's been basically assigned a position in the advisory council to Biden in relation to small businesses.
Nice.
So, I think that really opens up the potential of saying, hey, if we really want to help small businesses, then let's make sure that they have customers. Yeah. And, if we want there to be customers, let's make sure people have money to spend. So let's stimulate the economy with cash for everyone. And so I think that he'll be able to further the potential for monthly stimulus checks here in the U.S. Hopefully under the administration.
Cool. I'm checking my computer because it wouldn't be live if there wouldn't be questions live, and we have one from Roman from Facebook. How must political system worldwide be designed to ensure that the basic income really works? And what role does migration play in this matter? But I think there's two different questions. Let's stick to the first one. What was your suggestion?
Sure, I would say worldwide, I think it's important to basically see that to a degree, there already is a universal basic income functioning, but it's broken up into different conditional forms. So a conditional form is welfare as we know it here in the US, or benefits elsewhere, where this is, you only give money to people if they are poor enough to receive it, or that you only give in-kind benefits like housing and various other things to people if they're poor enough to receive it. And then that's like a specific group that's looked down upon. And then the rest of society, they usually get some kind of tax expenditure in the form of tax credits, subsidies, allowances. So it's very common for people to receive some kind of standard deduction where, they don't pay any taxes until they reach a certain amount of income, usually around the poverty level. And then they start paying taxes after that point. So they're receiving a subsidy and they're receiving it from the state, but they don't see it as being any kind of check because it isn't. It's just saying that you don't have to pay taxes until this amount. And I think that if we start saying, hey, instead of carving out these exemptions, instead of providing people this assistance through the tax code, then let's just make sure that they have that same check that everyone else does, and then they can be taxed based on every dollar earned on top of it instead of waiting for some amount. And so that's true all over the world, where a place like India may has like over 1,000 subsidies, and so they're talking about, hey, let's actually to a large degree cash out these subsidies and provide people this income instead of these subsidies. And that's also something that Iran actually did to a degree as well. Mm-hmm. With they cashed out their oil subsidy and provided cash instead. So I think that around the world there is this ability to just make the existing things unconditional and in the form of cash, without actually changing the budgets at all. And then depending on the country, you could either start with that fully universal amount, or you could introduce a tax that you could raise it higher. But I think that to a large degree, it is much simpler than people think it is financially. Yeah. And also, it's important to realize that it's poverty itself is not free. It's very expensive. Yeah. But also in relation to the other part of that question, that it's a common response to think, oh, well, universal basic income is to everybody, but obviously you can't give it to everybody, because then everybody would want to immediately come to the country and start receiving that same basic income too. That's this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment of, we can't possibly do that. And I think realistically speaking, it would be easier to start with basic income being provided to citizens only, just like citizens only have the right to vote. So you kind of tie those things together, where if you have the right to vote, then not only do you recognize as having a voice in the country, but you should also receive this rightful human right to not live in poverty and in the fear of poverty. So tying it to citizenship, I think, ends a lot of those issues. And if every country tied to citizenship, then we would cover everybody that there is. Yeah, good. So that's important.
Okay, so more a redistribution of the cash. Before we dig into America, I want to go into America. Stockton, John Forbes. I'm coming to this later. No, but I think Albert Wenger did something with a team in New York. I want to know more about it. I have another question from Christoph. According to stimulus and Corona and that suits, and then I would really love to jump into a few things which are going on in America. How does Corona change the discussion about the basic income? Because government stimulus creates somehow a basic income.
Yeah, I think it changes the conversation because, let's say, so in the US, we framed our stimulus check as an advance tax rebate.
Okay.
So and that even caused some confusion, because people thought, wait a second, am I just getting like an advance as far as something I have to pay back later? Or that it shrinks what I would get because I'm getting part of it now. And that's not the way that worked. It's just, it was a new credit, and they're just saying it's for next year. So there's kind of a political explanation there.
Is it already a little bit a negative income tax or not?
No, I wouldn't call it a negative income tax. There was some similarities in that there was clawback to a degree. So, here for the stimulus check, let's say if you were a single, then up to it was $98,000. That was when you got nothing, and it was $75,000 where you got the full amount. So there was a slope there where they did vary the amount depending on what your income was in previous years. So to a degree, that was like negative income tax like, but this was more of like an advance rebate, and saying that you don't owe taxes on this. We're just going to make sure that you get this cash rebate, the year before. And so that's actually, I think it enables, let's say, someone, if you're conservative, or if you're someone you think, oh, I don't want any kind of welfare. I don't want money for nothing, but you are okay with getting a tax rebate. Because you see it as, oh, well, I'm paying taxes and this is just getting more money back because of the taxes that I pay. And so then that gets around this kind of belief that it's some kind of welfare or something like that. It's just a tax rebate that's meant to stimulate the economy now. And so I think that's valuable in going forward, to explain to people that, that's how this works. It's just, we want to make sure everyone gets it. And then what you do is, instead of saying that that the amount should be changed based on the income that you earned last year, that you can say, we aren't going to change it this year. You get the full amount, but then next year when you do your taxes, we vary what you pay in taxes based on what your incomes were this year. So I think there's a help there in helping people understand what it is.
Cool, great. Because it comes from the crowd, once more a little bit deeper. If only citizens get a basic income, what happens to foreigners? They don't get it. My question is more, is the debate in America already that mature, sorry to call it like that, that one can go in these details? Because yes, it is a topic, it's also here. And I'm not want to go into are you signed in as a Swiss or a US citizen or so, but there's a lot of people who by law maybe not have the right to be gaining of this stimulus, or to have an advantage out of this. And how's this going? Because I know
I would say that it's part of the discussion. I don't like, there is a conservative sentiment here in the U.S. already, especially when it comes to welfare, where conservatives are upset about the idea of people being able to cross the border and receive, say, Medicaid and food stamps and these things. So then they're constantly talking about how that shouldn't be the case, and let's make sure that we either keep them out or we make sure that they don't get this. So when it comes to like the stimulus check, that was immediately part of the discussion as well. And we're talking about, well, who should get the stimulus check? And it's like, well, definitely they shouldn't get it. So there's always going to be that conservative push to that, saying that you have to prove either by citizenship or some kind of longer term residency that you should get that. And the longest running basic income program I think in the world is in Alaska, and that's been operating since 1982, where people receive on average around $1,600 per year. And in order to qualify for that, you have to have been a resident of Alaska for the entire previous year. So basically you have to have lived there for at least 1 year in order to receive that dividend. So I think no matter what you do, you have to have some kind of time limit.
And it's a discussion of migration, handling migration, and also who earns who. I mean, with unemployment money in Switzerland or in US, it's also it's the same. You need a bit of a time. The question would come in this crisis: do we need to shift this time or not? But let's not go into this. I would love to go a little bit into New York, or specifically initiatives that gained popularity or even grew out of that COVID crisis. I think there was something in New York. Sure, there was more. Please tell us some insights.
So I think one of the biggest developments here in the U.S. Was the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income initiative that grew out of the Stockton pilot. So Mayor Michael Tubbs in Stockton, started this Stockton pilot. Now about 2 years ago. And so he's been the leading mayor in calling for basic income. And as a result of this pandemic, it suddenly, made sense to him. It's like, hey, people around this country are hurting right now, and they're not getting the assistance that they need. They're falling through the cracks. Let's, what can we do at the local level to not only show the value of the idea of basic income, but also to immediately help people, at least some segment of the population in those cities. So that launched with 11 mayors, so 11 cities, and it has grown now to 25.
Wow. And
so there's 25 pilots. Actually, there's some cities have more than one pilot, so you could say that there's more than that, but there's pilots going on or being planned in 25 cities going forward. And I think, not only does that show an important amount of growing support, and also, these are mayors, so mayors have influence, within their political spheres, that's really helpful. But you're also seeing this kind of focus on different elements of basic income and how it could be useful through this. So as an example of that, whereas in Stockton, they provided in income to those, the people who qualified were earning under the median amount of income, and there was a randomization as part of it. So it wasn't only targeting certain people, a lot of people could apply and get that. And so that was more of a larger kind of look at the population, even though, say, only 125 people were receiving that income. But then you see, like, one of the existing projects was in Jackson, Mississippi, and that was studying $1,000 a month to Black single mothers. And so something like that shows, this is a specific demographic that is disproportionately impacted by the design of the existing safety net and the design of the economy and the racism inherent in the economy, and how we arguably don't help our kids enough because here in the U.S. we don't have a child allowance. So that was really interesting to show how valuable it is, that specific population. And so growing out of that, you're seeing some of these other pilots do somewhat similar things. Like actually just yesterday, San Francisco announced something new where they're calling it the basic income for artists pilot, where a number of around 100 artists are going to be able to receive this $1,000 a month without conditions for 6 months.
Wow.
And so that's something where it can show, that so much in society, there's so much art in society that is prevented from becoming, because, say, the artists aren't able to focus on that art because they're having to, say, work some part-time job, they're having to work just to get by, they're having to instead of focusing on their art. So something like that can help artists understand, why this is so important and why they should be fighting for it.
Wow.
And
2 days ago, Daniel Haney made the proposal, why don't we implement the universal basic incomes for artists, but if we translate it in German, it's called Kultur, and meaning those who shape the culture. That 2 days ago was in the talk. It was like, hey, maybe we should start there, or just cut a piece of the cake and say, well, let's start with that, because then the debate starts, who shapes the culture actually, with what? Being at home, taking care of your kids. Yeah, I guess you do. So we're then suddenly on this debate of what culture is and what culture brings to us, and how important that is, and very, very interesting.
Yeah.
One question is, those pilot projects, you talked about a great number, 25 or even maybe 26 with California now. Are those all scientifically designed and watched, or are there some of them, or not saying just political, not political, it's the wrong word, governmental pilots to just distribute better and go forward, or are they scientifically relevant?
Yeah, so this is interesting too. This is so the Mayors for Guaranteed Income Coalition is actually became this organization, and they got essentially seed funding from Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter. He, for those who don't know, Jack Dorsey is a multi-billionaire who actually set aside $1 billion to actually help advance basic income in the U.S. And so part of this is going towards the Mayors for Guaranteed Income initiative, and part of that organization is now creating the apparatus for cities to utilize kind of the same kind of, let's say, scientific infrastructure, so that they can more easily start pilots, and that those pilots will create good data and will be evaluated in a solidly scientific way. Great. So kind of like
a template.
Like a template. Yeah, exactly.
Great. Hey, very interesting. Very interesting. Have you been looking to Europe a little bit in the past? Have you seen what Micha and his team started in Germany with a pilot project on the scientific base, and 2 million people signed up? I can say, okay, they got money on top for 3 years. Of course, you sign up, but on the other hand, it was great. And did one hear in America from this?
First of all, I've met Bohmeyer a couple times, and we've spent some time together, and it was just really interesting learning some of the ins and outs of what's being learned through that in Germany over the years. And I wouldn't we didn't do our own American version of that. But I do actually think that there's going to be some things starting soon that are in somewhat inspired by that, to enable this crowdfunding and raffling of basic incomes in some form here in the U.S.
I mean, you got your income through Patreon, aren't you? You were pioneers there, aren't you? There already?
Yeah. I mean, and actually, I was actually inspired by Bohmeyer as well when I first started my Patreon crowdfunding. I thought that this idea of this crowdfunding of basic incomes could be accomplished through Patreon as a platform at an individual level, and so that's how I started doing that. That process, I launched my crowdfunding at the end of 2014, and it took all of 2015, to grow from $0 a month to $1,000 a month. And so then I accomplished that and have been living with it since January of 2016. So that was a process, and I've encouraged people to try to do that individually on their own using that platform. But as far as enabling a mass crowdfunding for multiple people as a way of learning more about it and getting people, let's say, marketing the idea to people, we haven't started that yet in the U.S., but I do think that it will start.
Do you think that's the future of civil-based initiatives? To start really inventing or investing in humans, because it just makes sense. For me, it makes economically absolutely sense. We've seen it in the Corona crisis, stimulus. Don't give them food checks, give them money, because maybe they grow their own food. So what should they do with food stamps? But money everybody needs for the basics. And but on a civic initiative basis, I mean, we're doing a similar project in Switzerland. We just started, and it's growing. But does it make sense for you too? Like when we have on the political sides, we've seen what's going on the science sides, but we also have this activism going on in the world. People want to gather.
Yeah, I think all of these things need to go together. Where all these experiments are a good example. So I said earlier that I don't necessarily see the requirement for experiments. We already know that it works, but at the same time, I'm excited about all of the experiments, and the reason that is because I don't necessarily see experiments as being necessary to prove that it works. I see experiments as being necessary to market the idea
and
to
debate.
people so that they demand it. I think that it's unfortunate, but also just kind of the way that our minds work is that for most people, you don't care about the evidence that it can be helpful, but we're kind of built around anecdotal evidence, that it's these individual stories that just stick in our minds, and then that's the reflection of if something works or not. So
which creates a response personal too.
Yeah. So in Germany, that was really good about telling those stories, and I think that that's the key here with these experiments in the US is to tell those stories and to get like a very good selection of America where you have a story after story that at least a large group of people in America can see themselves in, and that can flick that switch that they say, oh, I see myself, I see how valuable that would be to me, I should make sure that this idea happens.
I mean, mein Grundeinkommen, a dreamliner in storytelling. Imagine they gave away 650 yearly basic incomes to individuals, means that their knowledge is 650 years as universal basic income.
Right.
Okay, not significant.
That's great.
Not significant, but changing it, thinking of how many years that is. Hey, quick ooze. Here in Switzerland, we did the initiative, meaning the Swiss people had the chance to say yes or no to universal basic income, which then would have had to be implemented by the government. We said no, most of them said no. Of course, Corona crisis, but also we already talked now. The question came up. It pops up like mushrooms in the autumn here in the woods. The second initiative, is it time or not? Should we launch it? Political processes are quite slow, so you need first the sign-offs on the street or digital, and then goes to the politics, and it takes 1 to 3 years until it comes to vote. What do you think? I mean, besides what already happened today, the debate back in 2016, but do you think it's time for the Swiss to go again?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see that, and it's interesting. I was actually there in Switzerland on the day that the voting took place, and I wrote an article for Politico. After that, where I talked about how, this was actually a big win, that, this is a process, and that the campaign itself helped grow the idea both within Switzerland and internationally, and that sure, 71%, say voted no, but at the same time, you had well over 20% of the people voting, yes, and
a quarter,
it was incredible that you could have, an entire country talk about this idea that really no other country was really talking about in a serious way, and have that many people be in support of it. And also in the article, I wrote about this, in this, to help people understand the way the initiative process works, and that it's often the case that it's not the first time that an initiative comes across and is voted on the people that it's voted on yes, and that the example that I gave was how there was an initiative that was voted on by the people and voted down to the very similar degree of the basic income initiative, and then 12 years later they voted again, and the vote was yes. And what was that? It was women's suffrage. And so, there's an idea that can be kind of crazy, and then a decade later be saying, well, of course, why weren't we doing this the whole time? We should totally do this. So I think basic income is going to be another one of those ideas in Switzerland that it absolutely will at some point be voted on again. And I think that perhaps the pandemic just accelerated that, just as it accelerated it everywhere else, where there was this notion, like, let's say automation again is coming, but it's not here yet. But then bam, unemployment. And so here Switzerland can go, all right, well, we have this ability through direct democracy to get this going immediately instead of waiting as we would have waited originally. So yeah, I would love to see that happen. And also I was just seeing a new Europe-wide survey that was done just a matter of months ago, post-pandemic, where 71% of Europeans now actually support a basic income as well. So I mean, this is, and also besides that support, there is the Europe-wide ECI initiative for UBI that just actually launched a matter of weeks ago.
25th of September.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what a lot of people don't know, especially here in the U.S., is that that's the second time that initiative process has started, and the first time was before the Swiss initiative, and that process actually helped Europeans hear about basic income for the first time. That there was social media marketing of this, and people going, oh, I've never heard of this before, I get it, I support or don't support it. But it really helped grow the conversation there in the EU. So I think that this second process will actually help that as well and get more people on board with this idea, especially within the context of the pandemic. And so I look forward to hopefully a successful initiative in getting actually the 1 million signatures that they require, given enough awareness of the campaign itself. And then I think that too could help grow at the individual, nation level to make sure that they talk about this more seriously and pursue it to some degree.
Cool. Okay, Scott says, let's do it again. Maybe also a second or a third time. Time will tell. Thanks. Hey, short before we end up, I could talk hours with you. It's super great. But let's not stretch this too long. No matter who's good, who's right, or who's just a real asshole, presidential candidates in the US specifically. Nobody except Andrew, and a big woe for Andrew, I must say. I found it great, his campaign and the way he went through, and he got fucking far. Excuse me, I don't know if I'm still allowed to say this, but here we would. Also Joe Biden, they don't put it on their agenda. Why not? I think even Trump made this confusion on Twitter, which is actually already got to be normal, about the security package, the second part, or the money giving out for helping the crisis, and then no, we're not giving the money out, instead of hey, he could have maybe win that election saying, well, of course we give the money out, and we give it out as universal basic income to everybody. Why? Also, we see this here in Europe and Switzerland. It's so hard for the politicians to go with this, to take it on their agenda. What are they scared of?
Yeah, so I would say, politically speaking, we're really messed up here in the U.S. Things have gotten really bad as far as how partisan that we've grown, and negative partisanship has taken over our politics here in the U.S., where we're no longer voting for people that we support and ideas we support. We're really voting against them who we don't support and what we don't support. So I think out of that has grown where we are right now, where, let's say, we haven't been able to pass a second stimulus bill, and with the election coming up. And so common sense would dictate that, well, politicians should want to make sure that people receive assistance so that those politicians can be seen as helping them right before they vote, helping them to, encouraging them to vote, because hey, well, this person helped me, I like them, thank you, I want more of this, I'm going to vote yes. But that's not the way that works here. Things have grown so partisan that it's like it's encouraged to not pass anything, because then you can blame the other side for not passing something. So it's right now described as like a game of chicken, where each side is trying to not help the people before the election so that the other side can be blamed for not helping people.
Yeah,
that's a terrible structural problem that we need to fix. But on the bright side too, is that at least here, stimulus checks are the only thing that both sides can agree on as far as their giant packages that they create and all the different things they want to do all at once. At least they can agree on another check. So I would consider that to be a positive. And also, when it comes to Joe Biden, it's been encouraging to see that his selection of Kamala Harris. She was actually pushing. She was one of the few people in the Senate who was pushing monthly stimulus checks of $2,000 a month, and hopefully, with her as vice president, that would at least help somewhat with his potential of monthly stimulus checks in 2021 to help us recover, help our economy recover, help stimulate the economy. So that's encouraging. And another encouraging thing with Joe Biden too is that he recently added a fully refundable child tax credit to his campaign platform as part of this recovery process as well. So that would essentially be, a basic income for kids that would be provided, say, for 6 months or a year or something. But it would be monthly, and every adult, with a kid would get this income. And so I think that could potentially show the value to people as well. And so those things combined, I'm at least encouraged somewhat that there could be some movement in a Biden administration to get monthly stimulus checks. And if we do that, I think that would really help the case here in the U.S. for a permanent full UBI.
Wow, yeah. May the force be with you.
Thank you.
And geek. No, that's great. Maybe we should just call just call it different. I also have a T-shirt like you. Let's just call it stimulus checks. Then it seems that universal basic income or UBI or BGE or whatever take as a wording into your agenda is difficult. But talking about stimulus checks, talking about money stimulus to individuals, it's maybe through Corona, it seems a bit, but there's no more risk to talk about this. Also at the political level, which I found great. And
And I think if we can win the political argument that this is something that would recover economies and stimulate and grow economies, and you activate that, so you do it temporarily, and then you see that it does do that it does grow the economy, that it does actually help businesses,
help
and
poverty,
you see the success of this in action, then why would you stop doing that? Like, why would you stop growing the economy and stimulating the economy? You'd say, oh, well, let's continue doing this. Maybe you could, change the amount, based on permanence, but at least you can set the precedent that this is actually very effective for the entire economy. And I think once you set that precedent, then that really changes the entire argument.
Yeah. So then maybe you and me will be soon jobless. Maybe it won't be called universal basic income. Maybe it will be Freedom Dividend. Hey, Scott, thank you very much. I have Ushi from Facebook. Heartfelt greets and thanks for your precious work.
Thank you.
I pass this on to you. And hey, it was really nice talking to you. As I said, we could carry on. We also don't need to be finished at 5 o'clock here. But it was very, very interesting. Let's do this again. maybe next year the world will keep turning in that time, I'm sure. And hope the best for that America votes what they have deserved. That is a hard saying, but we're looking on you.
Please, we need all your fingers crossed and prayers and everything to hope that we turn things around here in November and actually get going in a better direction.
Cool. Hey, thanks again, Scott, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, I stay quickly online. Ich wechsle wieder auf Deutsch. Das war der Scott aus Amerika, spannende Insights. Ich möchte gerne noch den nächsten Live-Talk ankündigen, weil der ist bereits am nächsten Montag, 19. Oktober und diesmal wieder Schweizer Zeit, also am 2. Und zwar live im Studio mit mir, der Urs Helfenstein, und zwar kommen wir von Amerika zurück in die Schweiz, sogar ganz konkret auf Zürich. Viel mehr möchte ich nicht verraten, aber am Montag, am 2 oder nachher als Stream verfügbar, reden wir mit dem Urs über ein bisschen politische Vergangenheit im Stadtrat Zürich. Und ich danke vielmals fürs Zuschauen oder fürs Mitmachen und für die vielen Kommentare. Ich freue mich, es läuft und wünsche euch einen schönen Tag. Tschüss.